Geological Survey. Welcome, Matt.
Hello, everybody. Although I wasn't here in 1967 as a hydrologist with U.S. Geological Survey, the flood impacts myself and my colleagues on quite a regular basis. I'm going to relay some stories from the person who was the field office chief for the USGS here in Fairbanks in 1967, and there's actually a gentleman here tonight who was working for the USGS at the time, Mr. Tarkanian, sitting over here. And, if I make any mistakes, he can correct me. So I'm going to pretty much read what we have here because, like I said, these are not so much my stories as the stories of other individuals who are here, and a little bit about what the USGS does. So the U.S. Geological Survey is a federal agency tasked to provide reliable, impartial, and timely information that is needed to understand the nation's water resources. Stream flow information is available in real time at over 8,000 sites nationwide and just over 100 sites in Alaska. This information is used by cooperators to minimize the loss of life and property as a result of water-related natural hazards like floods. The USGS has continually monitored the stream flow on the Chena River since 1947. The USGS established a water office here in Fairbanks in 1966. At the time, the office was staffed by 2 hydrologic technicians and an intern. It was located in the basement of the old post office building over on Cushman Street. However, having been newly created in August of '67, the office was understaffed and poorly equipped. When the heavy rainfall began in Fairbanks, one of the technicians recognized that there would likely be widespread flooding and checked out a truck over the weekend and headed to Nenana and Healy with the intern to measure discharge in the rivers in that area. Meanwhile, Jim Meckel, who was the USGS field office chief, was returning from a canoe trip on the Delta River, and he actually drove the last vehicle across the Salcha River Bridge on his way back to Fairbanks on Sunday evening. Anticipating the high water in Fairbanks, Jim approached a colleague with the Corps of Engineers about the use of a boat for making flood measurements. This not-to-be-named engineer checked out a boat from the equipment yard, and as he and Jim were walking to the boat, the engineer threw all the property paperwork in the trash and told Jim the boat now belongs to the USGS. I started working for the USGS in 1991, and I can say that when I started, we still had that boat. With the equipment problems taken care of, Jim returned to the basement of the USGS with great foresight, removed all the paper records that were there so that they not be destroyed should the office get flooded. Early forecasts indicated that Chena River would crest at midnight on August 14th at about 14-foot gauge height. Jim, having seen the intensity of the rain on his drive back to Fairbanks from the Delta River, was convinced that the crest would be much higher. He managed to get a plane and a pilot for a reconnaissance flight of the Chena Basin, and during his flight he could see that much more water was coming, and he made a crude estimate based on his observations that the river would crest over 17 feet on the following day. Well, as a matter of policy, the USGS does not issue flood warnings. That is the job of our National Weather Service colleagues. During the flood, forecasts and warnings were being issued by the Anchorage Weather Service Bureau, right, at the time, with the assistance from a relatively new employee in the Fairbanks office. After the flight, Jim and the Weather Service employee headed to the Civil Defense Office, where Jim briefed the commander on the updated forecast. When the commander asked who determined that the flood was going to be larger than the original forecast, Jim pointed at the Weather Service employee. Lo and behold, the flood crested at 2 p.m. on the next day at 18.82 feet, nearly 5 feet higher than originally thought. Jim did, however, get into a bit of trouble with the USGS headquarters in Washington when the Daily News Miner reported, local hydrologists had better sense of flood forecast than the Weather Bureau on the other side of the mountains. The USGS records water surface elevation at our gauges and computes the discharge or volume of flow passing the gauge based on a relationship derived from field measurements. Measurements during floods are often difficult and dangerous, but are critical for refining this relationship. Jim and another technician began their flow measurement during the flood along the north bank of the Chena River, which at that point was Birch Hill. They progressed across the swollen river channel of Fairbanks, making depth and velocity measurements in their new boat, using telephone poles as distance markers. Once they got into town, they used city blocks to measure distance, and the two of them kept heading south and measuring until the water changed color, and that's when they knew they were no longer measuring the Chena, but they were in the Chena River. They measured 73,600 cubic feet per second at a stage of 18.8 feet. The flood peaked at 74,400 cubic feet per second. Just as a matter of reference, right now the Chena is running 1,400 cubic feet per second at 1.1 foot gauge height. If I had to pick the single most important discharge measurement ever made in Alaska, this one would surely be it. As a result of the 1967 flood, the USGS now operates 5 gauges in the Chena Basin, as opposed to just the one that was here in 1967. Between the USGS, the Corps of Engineers, and the National Weather Service, the Chena is the most heavily gauged and monitored basin in Alaska. So if you have any more questions or information about the flood, you could take a look at the USGS website, waterdata.usgs.gov. Feel free to give me a call over at the USGS Water Office, and we can talk a little bit. Thank you.